Hey there, everybody. Welcome. We are back for our second session on this still life painting that I have here. And last week, what we got into was the underpainting, essentially. We worked on some compositional sketches, focusing really on just establishing the light and dark pattern. And we now have a still life started. Bear with me 1 second. All right. So today, what we're going to do is work back into this. And typically, I'll start with a dark kind of drawing mixture. And we are going to get to that, but I am going to do something first that I think might be somewhat surprising. So stay tuned for that. Let's get going. All right, so we've got our composition kind of mapped out. And really, the goal of this particular still life demonstration for me has been to kind of focus on the process. I think the process is sort of what to familiarize yourself with if you want to see progress and improvement as a beginning or an intermediate student. Really just developing a confidence that if you approach the painting in a logical set of steps, it's going to pay off for you. It will make more sense and it will come together a little bit more effortlessly. You might have more fun with it too. So not only will we focus on that process, we are going to talk about how to keep the value pattern, because the value pattern is really the most important thing in a picture. Like, where are the lights and where are the darks? And actually, I've had this little painting study up on my easel all week, and I really like where the lights and darks are. And the challenge is when I like it this much at the initial stage, I sometimes struggle to maintain what I like about it. And I'll tell you what I think I like about it is the value pattern. So today I'm really going to focus very hard on maintaining the value pattern. But as I said at the beginning, I'm going to do something somewhat surprising, a little out of character for the way I typically start a painting. And I want to get this little Forsythia flower painted in. And I'm going to start opaquely. I'm not going to outline it with like a deep purple or something, because that's just going to make it like muddy and horrible. But if I can go into this beautiful yellow color just fresh on the canvas, I'm going to. So we're going to start out that way. Just a quick check for my technical, I just want to make sure everything's like looking good, going well. So I'm popping over to look at another screen. We're just going to see. Please stand by. I will be returning briefly. Okay, looks good, looks good. If anybody sees anything off, if the mic cuts out, just throw it in the chat if you can. Or if you have any questions, just let me know. All right, so we're going to actually start. Ooh, there goes one brush. Okay. I'm going to put a little tiny bit of oil on the palette. And here we go. We're going to pick up some very light, bright yellow. And I think that's just going to be like screaming off of that purple underpainting in a good way, I hope. I might need more paint. And I already don't like this brush, but we're going to make do until I can go brush shopping. Let's just put that out there into the universe. I need some time to attend to my paintbrushes, my paints, and all of the things to get ready for a really fun plein air painting trip I will be taking soon. So I'll keep you posted on that. All right, so because I usually will draw with like a darker color, it really isn't conducive to maintaining like the nice light, bright yellow that I need for these blossoms. So I'm just gonna take variation here and there. Although I don't love the brush, it's not the worst thing I've ever used, but okay. And I want to let this layer like not just be like a kind of wrote, like, I'm just going to fill in these yellow shapes and then we'll worry about how it looks later. I wonder how much I can get in and like express with just this step about how these look. Let's find out. Oh, great, Gary. Thank you so much for the sound and picture comment. All right. So I don't want to rush it too much, but I'm so excited about this yellow. Okay, here we go. I'm going to put a little tiny bit of teal out here, and this is going to tend the yellow a little cooler. Okay. So here we have a cooler yellow, and we have the cadmium yellow lemon. That's the cooler of all of my yellows. You can tell. It just looks lighter and more lemony. And, you know, if you were to order a glass of lemonade, which color would you like it to come? It's this one. It's cooling. It's very light. It's very, it tends more toward the blue. So it's kind of variation that I'm seeking out in these first initial brush strokes. And perhaps if I get enough variation, I don't even have to do that much more to these. And actually, I kind of planned this when I set this up. I was like, oh, yeah, I could just do this little underpainting and come in here and, you know, but all of that kind of, that stuff really just, I think, can emerge from the approach of dealing with your painting in layers. And I also want to say that it doesn't have to just be a painting. We can apply this same approach, watercolor, pastel, whatever medium or material you're working in. I'm just going to vary that color a little bit more green at the end. Okay. There's some more ochre. I see some like kind of warmer. Let's see, maybe I'll try to make this like three-dimensional feeling or looking into that little bloom. And what I do is I sort of identify the object or area of the still life that I'm looking at. And if it's like a floral thing, if it's leaves and flowers and branches and all sorts of things, you know, within reason, I can move things and I can just emphasize, like, if I want to pick up like this particular bloom, it doesn't really matter that it's not that close to the other one. So you can move these things around. And like I said, kind of within reason. There are sort of, you know, it gets to not be so useful to be looking at a still life if you're just absolutely making things up, changing colors, you know, adding like a variety of things. Now, that is not to say that this process is not, you know, useful for another artist. I'm just talking about for me, just the way that I sort of look at, you know, creating art. I kind of need that reference to the real world as an inspiration. And now I kind of want these marks to just be a little looser. I've got sort of like a few that we'll focus in on, but I'm going to see if I can place some interesting directional. I mean, these are all just little arrows, aren't they? They're just little directional marks that we can direct the viewer's attention and create some interest and just a dynamic kind of quality of movement. Step back a little bit. I do like where it's going though. It really needed that underpainting so that this yellow would show up. And then what I'll do is I'll kind of like fill up to the yellow. But hopefully I can leave some of these edges alone. That's always my goal. I talk about this a lot in painting classes that, it's my goal to leave some of these beautiful unfinished areas working in the painting, not just left at the end, but actually like working. That's the key. I can easily leave something unfinished, but can I leave it unfinished in a way that looks completely intentional and it just like knocks you out? Because I've seen it. And if you know what I'm talking about, like the way that like Richard Schmid would paint and that background being so unfinished and like this kind of dynamic, like swirling paint quality that ends in this beautifully painted portrait. Um, and you only get one shot at it. There's no correcting, there's no coming back through. It's really just a once and done. And it kind of just conveys so much about an individual, I don't know, experience, but also just like the act of making a painting. Maybe non painters don't quite get that out of it, but you know, I think we all get something from it. So I got to focus in on like, where do I want a little more pop? I'm feeling like I don't want to go too far to the corners. I kind of want to let them fade a little bit, but I need more twist through here. Just a little too basic feeling right now. I need more like, oh, that's a cool, weird shape that's observed and not just a symbol of for Cynthia, right? Because I can definitely see that that would be very easy to do. Just so easy to just be like, oh, I'll just make these little, 3 leaves all facing the same way. But like I said, I'll observe if I can find a nice candidate to observe and then um, carefully observe and paint that one. That should be enough. I have to remember that we need a feeling of like branches behind this and a little structure. But I also just want like this light feeling, so changing a little scale there a little bit. So far, I really like this one. It kind of has this nice arcing quality, and I want to concentrate a little bit around here. Let's see what happens. There's this like spiral this way. So really, like when I'm doing this placement, I do sort of take my cues from what I see, but I also just feel like it does, it's best when it takes on a life of its own. And sometimes it doesn't right away, like to be honest, sometimes it takes a minute to like kind of have these floral arrangements feel natural but also expressive. I think I have an okay start with this. I'm going to try and just push and pull a little bit spatially with these, like give it some highlights, give it some, okay, a little lift to the form. Do a little better with that shape. And then we have this kind of like so some of it I don't want, too much clarity on every single one, but I want to do enough where like I'm not trying to paint over like a dark orangey, salmon color up there, as I will be putting into the background momentarily. And like I said, I kind of want these to like fade out, but everything will go lighter up here. Since there's less contrast with this underpainting, I want to remember that I'm not changing that value too much. So some of it's kind of like imagining the values that will be next to it eventually. Whether dark or light, that idea of creating the right amount of contrast to support what you're painting and really describe what you're seeing. Okay. Just call that for now. Although I might take just a little bit of this yellow, and just for economy's sake, we might just give this pair like one little light. I'm not going to scrub like I'm painting a wall. I'm just throwing like a few little marks of these yellow color. Now I'm sort of like getting into that idea. That's kind of fun. So maybe we can just utilize this moment where that's on the brush, tie a few things together, and just like reinforce the idea of movement. Okay, that should do it. So getting into the next item on our to-do list here, we're going to start this block-in process, which, you know, began last week with this thin transparent underpainting and some compositional studies and sketches. So bear with me one moment, guys. I just realized that my phone will not be operating for much longer. Stand by briefly. All right, and in just a moment, we are going to get back to mixing up our colors for this block-in layer. So we've established the value pattern, and we did this with a transparent wash of paint. And now this week, while the wash of paint is dry, what we can do is we can go back with a thin but yet opaque layer of paint, and that's the plan today. Moved things just enough to be off. Sorry about that. Okay, looks pretty good. I think we are getting some charge. Okay, so this next color is going to be our background color. And like I said, I want to establish or keep the established value pattern. So I'm going to mix sort of two color shapes. The first one is going to be for our lighter area here, right, in the background. And then the second is kind of like getting into that shadow area that's going to establish that sense of depth and space. So I just want to mix for a little bit. I'm using the quinacridone red and pink. It's very like, word medicinal comes to mind. It does look like a medicine one might have to take, and we don't want that. So something complementary to this, something to gray this down, would be like a teal. And that's green enough to just give it like a little bit of depth, right? And it's still in that kind of blue family. And then if we wanted like the third pillar of color to go into this, I'm going to take a little bit of that yellow from the For Cynthia. I want to keep it fairly low contrast. I'm going to go a little bit more cadmium, and that looks pretty good, is my guess, for my background color. Top light. I would call that a cool warm or a warm cool. It's got a little bit of everything, but I think it's a really beautiful kind of slightly muted color. And then it's all about like the direction that we're muting these things in. But also, and contrary to what I literally just said, it's not so much all about the color in this layer. It still remains a lot about the value pattern, right? I'm mixing the shadow value area, a little richer, a little darker. We're going to indicate some depth and space. But the consistency with which I paint this layer is going to be such that we are going to adjust. We are going to build on top of this. Like, you don't have to feel like this is the everything, because it'll never be like so amazing that that's all you have to do. There's no possible way. You just have to build it up. So you have to start someplace. So we're going to start carefully, and we're going to think about the way that we're like muting these colors, but we're going to also be aware of the fact that, you know, over time, layers can say more than like one single color that you spent, you know, an hour mixing could ever do. So we'll just kind of get close enough for now. We're getting the idea. In our next layer, amazing stuff is going to happen. All right, here we go. I really love those two colors together. Now they're much like cooler and more like purpley than the colors I'm actually observing, but that's kind of where I want this to lean. So I sort of want to try this and see, and then we'll adjust as we go. So talking about the consistency is really the same as talking about the process. We want to kind of just zip through this from the standpoint of we are blocking this in. It is not a finishing layer. It can still be a beautiful layer. It can be a critical layer. It can be a layer that is revealed later at the end of the painting, that you still see it. So it might be a finishing layer, but it's truly just to cover the surface, and like we want to see what we have, right? So I'm just kind of going to start in this middle area. That did not change the value too much, so I really, really like that color. I also love it next to that yellowy green swipe that was there. And I know I want to go darker eventually in some of these shadows, but I can kind of leave the underpainting like breathing through a little bit, at least for now. I'm just thinly applying the paint. I can really go back pretty easily even today if I wanted to, but I certainly am not creating lumps of paint that it's going to just be really opaque, hard to paint over. And I'm using this like kind of mark where I'm like, the paint's fairly dry. You can kind of see some directional quality to the surface. So far, so good. I love to start painting. I think probably many people will gravitate towards starting paintings than finishing paintings. So it's probably not all that original, but in any case, I just really, enjoy the process of coming in with these first layers and marks. I want to join that color from the left side of the painting into the right side. And there was like a shape I really liked during that drawing process. So we're going to put that there. And let's see. I have like a little color shift from the salmon to the teal, kind of blue-green here. I'm thinking about the value pattern and shape. Thinking about the little succulent flower that's going to come this way, up this way, right? So I kind of want this color too. cut through this way. I'll just flick with the brush. All right, let's switch to the light. This is so exciting. Oh, wow. That is not what I want. It's not that exciting anymore. But we'll get it back. We'll get it back. Yeah, I really thought that kind of looked like a cool, like mauve-y color, but as soon as I put it on the canvas, maybe next to the underpainting, it's just not really feeling saturated enough, clean enough. It felt a little bit too grayed out, too muted, too purpley. I still need a lighter value though. I probably had too much teal in that color. I think I should go much more medicinal. It was like that first like Pepto-Bismol thing, you know? We're going back. Back to the Bismol. Still lighter. Let's hold it up. I mean, it's much better. It's not like, Let's just start a fresh palette. Sometimes this is necessary. Let's start with like a totally full saturation, just plus white, like a little tint of color. There's that medicinal pink. Wow, does it look different when you put it up against the painting? It's so exciting. All right, I'm going to go with a little bit of orange. Much better. It really needed that cadmium yellow to have any power at all. Okay, so let's try that in larger quantities because now I feel kind of confident about that. Pardon. All right. Even more cadmium. Just needs a little more zing, you know? It was like light enough, but not quite happy enough. But again, first layer, and I'll just go more thinly. I still feel like I'm going to be somewhat disappointed to see this color go down because I just love the purpley harmony, but I do want to move it in this direction. So we're just going to go for it. And sometimes you just have to get everything covered and everything pops into place. So interesting. I am feeling like I want to go a little bit more pink. There we go. And the oil is such that we can just put a few drops in to make that paint kind of flow. Look at that difference. Isn't that amazing? Now, it's important to note my brush is barely touching the surface. It's flicking really kind of quickly through that painting, but it's not depositing like a ton of paint on the surface. So this is a little bit of trial and error. I mean, I think if you're not in person with someone that can kind of show you this consistency, it can be a slight, there's like a little learning curve or challenge. But you definitely want to get paint where you can see the color, but you can still kind of move the paint quickly. Now that's drying up a little bit. Oop, and there goes my oil. We got it. All right, so we've got a little more oil. Here we go. This. A little of that. Okay, so we have some leaf shapes that we can sort of use this to define. Just slow for a moment here. I'm sort of like using this purple You know, is it a leaf? Is it a shadow? I want to cut in on it, but not too much. I'll bring that greenery back over. Okay. And then here's our clementines. And even during this block-in, like we can think a little bit about our edge quality. Just a little bit. And if anything, you just want to err on the side of softer edges. Nothing really screams, you know, put down a really sharp, definite edge. If you were to kind of half close your eyes, as I often tell people, and people will notice what I am doing when I'm painting, you can kind of see me. I have my eyes half closed. It's incredibly helpful because you really don't focus on the details. Now I want to go a lot more pink, something kind of directional this way. Still maintaining my little value pattern here, right? More or less. Underpainting was pretty well, I thought, you know, composed. Everything was kind of working in terms of like where the darks and lights are. Now, sometimes what we're dealing with in a value painting is just the relative lights and darks. So as I push, this color is obviously much darker than the color underneath it. But relative to the background, it is still lighter than that darker color in the background. So we're kind of keeping it like relative relationships, not the absolute value when you do that first underpainting. All right, so the other thing I want to do is just like mix up a little bit of this ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta. And I want a slightly more deep, shadowy color for the area behind the teapot. Kind of plum looking. I think it's going to look really great against that yellow pear. Let's try this out. Let's see what happens. Okay. Scraping up a new paintbrush. A lot of paint on this paintbrush. But again, some oil because we want that paint to flow. So, and you can kind of, you know, work with a palette knife, which is what I recommend to people. Let's get into a little test area. Okay, not bad. We definitely want this color to be deeper and darker than the teapot. I'm going to give it a little more blue for interest and variation in a few places. It's also sort of the foundation of the cast shadows. I'm going to be including that. All right, so we're taking this little magenta color with this deeper purple color, and it's really just a matter of like getting the amount of variation that you need to see. You don't want to go so far afield from your value that you're using that it starts to become choppy. But I do think a little bit of a color change and even a little tiny bit of a value change in areas like this, you definitely want to utilize it, especially if you're feeling like you want movement. These Forsythia blossoms should be kind of feeling like they're flying around, but having some idea that there are some shadows maybe on the wall. And we can also just strategically kind of utilize these shadows to both directional quality and also like pattern. The pattern is just like automatically like a rhythmic, right? It's like a rhythm. It's like if every mark was a sound, what's happening here. So thinking about like where you have little short staccato marks and where you have like long, open, very airy passages, all of it's very similar and can, you know, almost be thought of in terms of rhythm and music in a lot of ways. So that's my thoughts for today. But I do love paintings that have a quality of like you can see the marks, but you can also see the objects at the same time. You're sort of intrigued by both. That's kind of my cup of tea. All right, I'm going for a darker dark. Maybe not the darkest dark, but something to give this area a little bit more bite. I do not want to finish anything prematurely. Goodness, no. If you can recall, I said at the very beginning that people, we cannot focus in on one area too much. We really can't. So just keeping that in mind, I'm now brush mixing a deep green color for this little teal area, deep green area. See how she does. All right. I think a little more actual teal blue will be great. Wow. Sometimes two colors right next to each other are just really like, you're like, wow, I don't even know if I like that or don't like it, but it's very powerful what's going on right there. So it's just that red green mixture of that teal next to that kind of salmon color. They each do, really bring the other one out in a much stronger way. So thinking about like how grays and complements work to sort of like bring attention to the other color or remove a little bit of attention from one color to the next, right? And it's really all in your control to put in these variations of color. I think, I can get a much deeper black color in a subsequent layer, like to go into here to really keep that value pattern established. But for now, I'm really happy with this teal, and I just really like it against the underpainting of that bottle, which is sort of lighter and purpley. And hopefully that translates to, and that's just a weird fun mark that I'm just going to put in because I like it. And those should not be underestimated. I mean, I really think that like every mark should be what I'm considering like just a weird fun mark, right? And what I mean by that is like you have to feel good about it. Thinking like, oh, it should look another way. We have to be very careful we don't think that. It should not look another way. It should look just the way that you're going to put that mark down. Because there's only one way that you're going to describe it. So there, letting go of this like should be this way, should be that way, and just kind of like leaning into like the stuff you naturally do is also coincidentally, in my opinion, how people find like their natural style, right? It's very apparent. What am I even doing? Hold on. Sometimes when I start talking, especially about the more philosophical aspects here, I'll just go on autopilot and I'm like, what am I mixing for right now? I do believe I was going to start blocking in some grapes and cherries and kind of move through this composition. So let's do it. Let's keep going. Glad this is on video because I love this underpainting color so much where it's poking through. And it will be fun to kind of go back and see like if there's maybe a point in time when you could still kind of see its influence, but it was covered, right? Still theme of value and contrast. I am gonna carry on with my work here around the edges of these grapes. Okay. So getting these little shapes, they're kind of like these little chisel, triangles of light hitting the fabric. All right. We're just kind of closing in on this form a little bit. So the drawing, for me, like, I'm not going to do a locked down, like, this is the shape it's going to be, this is exactly the placement it's going to be. Not that that's like a bad way to go, but I do find more beauty in sort of like the appearance of that process of finding it. And I just think it's fun to kind of let that unfold and find the drawing as you go rather than like lock down everything before you start out. Need more color. Now, a lot of times people get very frustrated. Oh, you wouldn't believe it. So frustrated about remixing color, and I do too. Sometimes it can be a real pain to like run out of a color, especially if you have to squeeze out more color. Oh, I think you all feel that pain. However, it probably is the number one way to both learn how to mix colors better and to get variation in your painting when you don't. And even when you do learn how to mix colors, you can get that variation much more effectively and much more intentionally. So, you don't have to get the exact right color, but you do want to be able to compare. So hold your palette knife up to your painting or whatever reference you are matching. And I see a nice light color there. Let's mix a little bit more of the, scoop this all together, really tight little pile of paint. We just want to get everything off the palette knife. And then we're going to do like more of the shadow color. So I'm going to consolidate. And we will start with a little bit of white over here and our quinocridones. And I'm often thinking about like, what's the color out of the tube? What's the opposite of that color? What else is going on in my painting? What do I need to like knock that color down a step? Choices, we've all got them. It does not mean that there's like one specific color that's the magical color on the other side of the color wheel. It really, what I mean by choices, we've all got them, is that like almost any blue that you're going to use, it's going to cool down an orange color or neutralize an orange color. But some of those blues will also neutralize a red color if the blue tends to be more green and the red tends to be more orange. But you should equally try that with a more neutral red, a more balanced red, or even a cooler red. What will happen there? So we have all of these different choices that affect the final outcome of the color, and keeping the color wheel in mind and just really thinking in a complementary way is what I've really come to rely on for my own personal working and what I teach people. And again, as always and forever, it is value that is the most important. So keeping that value pattern. Paint feels a little bit thick. Okay. Move forward. And if you remember that like idea of this shape, and it's kind of like this X-shaped composition, very stable, very, very stable composition. Love that. We want to emphasize it. Now, I should probably step back from a painting this size or even a smaller painting. It is very important just to kind of keep like looking and making sure that your composition is remaining kind of intact. Yeah, and I'm painting up to all these little Forsythia situations, and that's going to take a minute. So. And then I'm always looking for like, what's the biggest kind of difference that we can make in the painting? At this time, I do feel like getting this background in is key. But then I definitely feel like we've got a lot of unpainted areas and very few minutes left here on the old timer. But let's see what we can do. I've kind of switched to like a smaller brush so that I can cover some ground. And then we'll put out just a little bit of oil. And I'm kind of thinking about working mainly like where I need the smaller brush right now, and then maybe I can switch to like a larger brush. I'm painting kind of right up to the Forsythia. I think I can get some branches and shadows in after this layer dries. Sort of leaving things a little bit loose for that, much like I did with the lock-in of the tree painting. I'm thinking about kind of weaving in some of those things like the branches and the shadows. I'll just try and indicate them in this really light layer and then come back and establish them a little more. It's like they're almost there, right? Something, I hope. They're not there, but they're almost there. They might be there if you just trust. Maybe they're there. All right, so we're gonna see. A little darker, but I don't want to panic. They're gonna show up eventually. Let's work this through and not gonna panic. Not going to panic. So this middle stage, this is where I do feel like intermediate or like advanced beginners, you know, that you're sort of been painting for a little while, you've done some paintings. This is kind of the moment myself. I've been painting for many, many years and still feel this draw and this pull to go to detail sooner than I need to. We've got to stay with that system of thinking general to specific and covering your big shapes. It doesn't have to be in 1 hour like this, but it should be like the first priority. And I'm leaving some space because I know I have color to lay down there. And backing up, I feel like it's maintaining. I'm gonna go a little bit lighter if I possibly can. And maybe having these disappear more into like a mid or a light color. Yeah, I think that's kind of the way to go, because then we have like a little bit of a higher contrast towards the heart of the painting, towards the center, towards the focal point. So we don't necessarily need it like on the edge. Oh, the teapot spout is, yeah, it's possibly background. We're going to get it back. Thank you, Gary. You know, these things happen. I think more important that you cover enough rather than not enough. Like, I'd rather see it go too far than not enough. Yeah, I did kind of like that teapot spout. Just accidentally covered it, Gary told me. It's pretty fun. Here, let's try to get it back. This is a great moment to see. Here's what we do. We've gone too far. We've lost a little bit of our drawing. And now we have some turf on this relatively clean brush. All right, so a little turf. I dabbed a little bit. Teapot spout was here. We're just gonna remove. And I just keep like dabbing the brush on my rag, much better than a paper towel, by the way, to remove as much paint as I can from that area. But if it's not perfectly clean, we're gonna be okay with it. Because there's probably enough there that I can paint over much more easily. Let's see if I can a little bit. All right, teapot spout. We're going to see you again when we block that teapot in. Here we go. Carrying on. And then into that little background area, I may just attempt, even at this late hour, to throw in just a few hints of some of the Forsythia that is just maybe fading into the background. A little bit of oil, 1 drop of white. And the white really does help make things a little more opaque, so it can be good. Not this, where am I seeing this? You can see the difference with how this mark of yellow is going onto wet paint. And I'm very glad that I put in a few more like defined Forsythia before I started in with the background color. And that gives this, I think, like a little bit of like a nicer quality to have like a few that are kind of softer and like fade into the background a little bit. So much more, I think, like directed to a focal point. So And I feel like it just needs, like another hour today. Sadly, we don't have it, but we do have a few more minutes. So what I'm going to do is just give this a little pass just to see if we can get a touch closer. And I'm not going super duper heavy with the paint. It's almost just like a scumbling of paint at this point. I've definitely moved it down the road. I like the direction. I think it's going to be okay. Let's check it out. Give the teapot a little something. So adding white to that yellow, it still is like way too yellow, but I do have this lovely purple ingredient over here, my teal. And that's going a little bit more purple. I'm going to go a little more teal because it feels too pink still. Okay, let's try this. I'm going to mix that into the yellow. And it's a muted color, and it's not the color, but it's probably going to be incredibly helpful. So let's see if we can't find some more white, use just a little bit of that color. Maybe one little bit more yellow. And all of a sudden, I kind of like it. I want to make a little orangier version of it next to it. And I want to make a cooler or bluer version of it. So I'm taking that initial color. Okay, that's kind of good. I like that little range for the teapot. So hopefully you guys can see that little color range and how I did that. Let's see what they look like as we block them in. And that might be one of our last little moves on this. Unfortunately, I didn't get everything covered, but with just a little oil, I'm going to start with kind of this lighter area because I just want to see this pop. And still keeping that consistency, thin, sketchy, but colorful enough, thick enough so that we can really get a sense of the color. And I'm trying to block it in with like some marks that maybe I can find these useful later. Let me get a little bit deeper in color on this side. I'll use that. Green. Here's our handle back. Funny. Soften that in just a little bit. And this rim has just a little bit of a deeper value. That. And then I want to reinforce that like directional quality that we were talking about. Like that X shape goes right through the teapot, in my personal opinion. And so I will see if I can't use this weird because it's not actually really there, but I think it kind of works. This peachy color to just emphasize that light shape. And maybe it's kind of there, but it certainly is pushed, and I'm really exaggerating it. All right, now I'll go the opposite direction. And we have a more greenish shadow color that I'm going to pop in sort of next to that. Because if you ever have an area where you're like, oh, it's just like one mud color next to the other, that is very likely an area that you could have tons of color flexibility and expressive use of color, you know. So spice it up. Spice it right on up if you can. Or at least try. And sometimes I do, you know, better than others at inventing these colors and really pulling them out. And, you know, I try. I kind of see that color and I'll try and determine what it is about that color that I like. Is it a blue-orange relationship? And I just exaggerate it. That's a shadow. And again, thinking of like this shape. And by shape, I mean like X. X. I'm going to see if I can't bring this little trail of color in. And at the same time as I'm emphasizing that little trail of color, I'm also trying to describe like a little bit of the pattern on the teapot. Probably just went too colorful. Stand by for brush mixing. Okay, here we go. That's better. Yeah, that's back. So there's going to be a pattern, and I do want to indicate it. I'm thinking more about the light and shadow than I am about like the specific pattern yet. And then just, of course, to tie things together, I'm just going to take this like, you know, whoops. What it was an amazing color. I was going to say, I'm going to take this amazing color, and then I accidentally just grabbed a ton of red. And what I wanted to do with that color was to dot that through and just kind of note it elsewhere. And let's see, where did I see it? I see it like next to the pear. I can definitely believe putting a little bit of that color there. I think I might just begin a few leaf shapes to tie that through. And then for sure, I'm going to go like pretty teal in this pink shape. That's what I'm doing. All right, now how is this gonna work? It is something, isn't it? Just to construct a painting, you just create 500 million problems for yourself that you are then required to solve for the thing to be successful. It's really fun. I highly recommend it. And along the way, you know, you get to experiment with things. You get to, you know, just sob uncontrollably if they don't work. Just joking. But it is so painful when it doesn't go well, isn't it? And that's why I really stress this process. The process will keep you from going off the rails too soon. Oh, look at that. I painted into my object again. Oh, well. I like that shape. See how that's kind of becoming like almost similar to that shape of the succulent. I do need to raise up the succulent a little bit if I want to make it believable in proportion. There we go. Okay. A little bit more information now. everything might curve back. Kind of Art Deco looking, that little shape. I really like, enjoy that color too. So definitely staying. Now, unfortunately, I cannot linger there and develop even more of this beautiful yellow, teal, blue, green. But just because I can, I'm just going to go one step further down the road here and see if we cannot make a believable orange block-in color just to quickly apply, because it will be a dramatic change. And then we'll call it a day. I mean, it's like a whole area that has yet to be addressed. Anyway, so let's just go with this orange. We'll just at least try and get some of that idea of those shapes. Leaves back there. Shadow color. Shadow color here. We'll just build up a little dimension here. At the same time, kind of correcting the worst of the drawing errors. Okay. I guess that's just trying to be a cast shadow in there. Yeah, that sure is. That's what it will be one day. I grow up to be a cast shadow in there. So stay tuned for that, and let me know if you guys have any questions or follow-ups on this. And if you have not yet, please do like and follow, like this video / follow this account, subscribe, what have you. I would so appreciate it, as I would any comments, any suggestions you have for future broadcasts. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I will see you next week at 2 p.m. I'll see you then.